I was in Taiwan one year when I was younger and had traveled to a busy night market. These are popular gatherings of food slash shop stalls that usually operate in the evening. Nearby, I spotted a sign for a net cafe in a 5 to 6 story tall building. Thinking I'd fire off some quick emails, I walked in the dark small entrance to the building. The building was older and hasn't been well maintained, but it's not out of the ordinary in Taiwan. The entrance just had a dark hallway that led to a small elevator. I pressed the elevator call button and entered. The elevator was uncharacteristically new compared to the building, but I didn't think much of it. Like some Chinese Taiwanese buildings, there wasn't a fourth floor. It's considered bad luck since 4 sounds a lot like death. So it just read 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, which was usual. I looked for the floor the net cafe was at, 6th floor, and pressed the button. It lurched into action quietly and began to ascend. When it stopped, I figured it was my floor, so I instinctively began to step out. Right before stepping out, however, the sight outside the elevator stopped me. It was pitch dark, only lit by the light in the elevator. It looked like it hasn't been occupied for decades, with some random pieces of furniture covered with white cloths or similar. It was a small building, so each floor were single occupancy. So I can see pretty much the entire floor from the elevator. Thinking I must have gotten off on the wrong floor, I checked the light that indicates which floor you're on. Strangely, there was nothing. None of the indicators were on, but the floor button to the net cafe was still lit, so I know I haven't gotten there yet. All this happened within a couple of seconds. That's when I noticed a figure moving in the distance of the floor. It was not very visible, but I could make out what looks like a person dressed in some kind of gown, moving slowly towards the elevator, where I was. I was thoroughly creeped out, so I started pressing the closed door button. As soon as I pressed it, the elevator light flickered off, and I'm in pitch dark. I'm this close to pissing my pants, and it's actually kind of freaking me out thinking back to it. The light flickered back on under a second, and the door closed. The elevator jolted back to life. A few moments later, it opened again to the net cafe. I am beyond relieved at this point. I walked out immediately and sat down at a computer. After gathering my wits a bit, I walked over to the cashier's desk and told him what I saw. The girl working there listened and her face turned a bit ashen, so I asked her if she heard of something similar. She told me that she's never experienced it, but some co-workers and occasional customers have brought it up. Basically, the building has 6 floors, and the 4th floor had a history. Apparently, the floor used to be a hair salon of some sorts, until one of the employees killed herself there for some reason. She slit her wrist over the hair wash station and died. The store continued operations despite stories of weird appearances. When customers got their hair rinsed, the water would look a little red, like the customer was bleeding. Little things like that. And a couple of people reported seeing someone's figure walking away in the mirror, but wouldn't see anyone when they turned to check. Naturally, the business closed down a few months later. The building owner tried to re-rent the place out, but never had any luck. Most businesses are quite superstitious, and no one wanted to rent the 4th floor after someone had died in it, even at a very cheap price. Finally, after dropping the price to nearly nothing, a stationery supply store wanted to rent. During the renovations of the floor, however, several accidents would happen. Tools would end up in strange places, a mirror from the previous business shattered when no one was near it, and finally a worker had his hand jammed between the elevator doors when it closed on him unexpectedly. The workers refused to continue working, and finally the business left, and the building owner finally gave up and shut down the floor. He then had the elevator company come in and to replace the panel so that the elevator could not go to the 4th floor. Let me repeat that. The elevator was programmed to never go to the 4th floor. It doesn't even have a button. But for some reason, sometimes when people take the elevator, it would go to the 4th floor and the doors would open, and some, like myself, would see a figure walking around in the dark. When I was younger, I used to horseback around Northern California for weeks at a time. This was during late 70s, early 80s. I rarely used a compass, but I always had a map of my area. I'm pretty good at dead reckoning via landmarks, and I've never been lost in my life. except once. I was in the Six Rivers National Forest, heading south towards the Trinity County. There's a very rough terrain with lots of high ridges, steep hills, rocks everywhere, and nasty brush to tangle you. I was riding the ridges, heading generally south, and trying to find easy places to cross the next ridge when it became convenient. The skies were partly cloudy, and it was a cool 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold for that time of year since it was early August, and the temperatures were normally 90 degrees plus Fahrenheit during the day. I found a reasonable spot to cross over to the next ridge south of me and started down. When I got into the ravine, it turned out that what looked easy from above was actually a rocky nightmare, and I started walking up the ravine to find an easier place to get out of there. A wind picked up and it started drizzling. I walked a mile or so. Couldn't find anything that I wanted to risk my neck on, and most importantly my horse's hooves, and decided to start up the side I had come down originally. I got to the top and took a look around to orient myself, and I was in shock. The landscape was completely different. And I don't mean that it was lower or easier or less rocky. I mean that all of my landmarks were gone. Some of them had peaks that were 30 to 40 miles away, others were a lot closer. It was completely different. I had no idea where I was, and I was completely disoriented. I dug out my map and started to review where I was. The angles on the hills I had been navigating by earlier, etc. I couldn't find anything that matched. The only thing I could possibly identify was the route up from the ravine that I had just come up from. Since it was cloudy, I couldn't navigate by the sun. All I had were the landmarks that I used for Dead Reckoning, and those were gone. The wind was picking up, and it was getting very, very cold. I almost expected snow. I had no idea where I was, so I decided to backtrack to my last known position and see if I could pick up where I left off. I started down the hill, got to the bottom of the ravine, started the opposite direction up the ravine. This time, I was very careful, watching for signs of my passage before, and the hill I came down in from the first place. It stopped raining, the wind died down, and the day started to warm up. I found my original trail down the hill, started back up, and got to the top. All the landmarks were there now. I was totally confused. I kept going on the ridge, watching carefully to find where I had come up before. When I got to the spot where I thought it should be, there was no sign of it. I cast back and forth for a while, trying to find my trail with no success. All of my landmarks were there to see. Eventually, I just gave up and continued on the ridge. A bit later, I found an easy trail down, and an easy trail back up the other side, and continued on my way. To this day, I have no idea what happened. Even though it was drizzling, I should have been able to see the closer landmarks, and honestly, the further landmarks were big enough to see. To that point, thinking back on it, there was no sign that it was drizzling when I continued to where I had ascended the first time, and the temperature swings were wild that day, easily 30 to 40 Fahrenheit. Not uncommon in the mountains, but really odd for that time of year in that place. Another thing, originally I had chosen to descend at that point because there was nothing to prevent me from going up on the other side. I could see easily from the ridgetop, but when I arrived, there were tons of boulders blocking me that I should have been able to see from the top. It's eerie and creepy. At the time, sure, but I was more focused on trying to orient myself, but thinking back on it, it's even more. I was a live-in caretaker for a 94-year-old woman with Alzheimer's for about a year and a half. She had moved into her daughter's home deep in the woods of middle nowhere, Washington. Marie was prone to say weird things, like that her sister, mother, and husband, who were all deceased, were in the house or outside regularly. I had been working with dementia patients for a few years by this point, so it never bothered me. Marie was terrified of the woods. She would tell me about how there's dangerous animals out there and I could get lost easily, so I must always stay inside. She was also worried about her mother and husband having to travel through them. Again, this wasn't worrisome behavior given her health condition. I'd been working with her about 6 or 7 months when I would start waking up to her walking down the halls in the middle of the night. Sundowning is fairly normal for people with Alzheimer's, so again, I wasn't troubled by this. But she started going to a specific window and giggling. Like, She was interacting with someone outside the window. When asked what she was doing, she'd say, "My mother is out there." Kind of weird, but there's a different perception in her world now. One night in the dead of winter, her daughters and I are awoken to the blaring of the house's alarm systems. The daughter and I check the doors and windows, none of which seem to be disturbed or unlocked. The only thing missing is Marie. She's nowhere in the house. Panicked, I rush outside to find her while the daughter continues to search the house. No tracks anywhere, no disturbed snow, nothing. After 10 to 15 minutes of yelling, searching the woods, I start making my way back to the house where her daughter was already in the process of calling 911. As I approach the house, I see Marie standing outside the window she normally stood at, giggling. There's not a single footstep in the snow around her, nor is she cold to the touch. She's just standing there laughing at nothing. Didn't even know she was outside. Her late night windows visits became more frequent after this, but less happy. She'd get combative with the window and scream at whoever she believed was to be there. Then it just stopped one day. One of the last conversations I had with Marie before she passed, she told me to not let them take me into those woods. I hope they didn't. Back in the early 90s, I worked for Domino's Pizza. When this happened, I was an assistant manager, but we had a delivery sometimes too. This night, it was just after 11. I made a delivery to a house in one of our middle-income neighborhoods. I get to the house and there's not a light on. If the port light wasn't on, we were supposed to go to a payphone and call the number on the order. That was to prevent robberies. I never did that. I would just go ahead and go to the door. But this night, I sat in my car for a minute, and I just had a gut feeling, and I always listen to my gut. So I drove back 2 blocks to a payphone and called the number. It was disconnected. I decided to wait just a minute before making the second call we were supposed to make. If they didn't answer the second time, we were supposed to go back to the store. As I stood there, I noticed the Pizza Hut drive-thru, but really didn't think about it. You spot each other while on the road. I call back, still disconnected. For some reason, I decide to return to the house and just see if someone comes to the door. I get back and realize the Pizza Hut car is sitting in my driveway. I think, what the hell? I turn in the long driveway that is lined on the left side by the tall evergreen tree shrub things, and I immediately notice that there's something big on the ground next to the open driver's door of the Pizza Hut car. I pull up behind him and park and realize that it's the driver. I decide he must have had a heart attack or something, so I run up to see what I can do to help. When I get to him, I realize his skull has been caved in so bad I can actually see his brains. I run back to my car and lock the door. I drive like 90 miles per hour those 2 blocks to the payphone and call the cops. I then call my store and tell them what is going on and have them call Pizza Hut. I wait for the cops to come through and I go back. Eventually the detective comes over to talk to me. He tells me that first in the bushes next to the driveway, they found a realty sign. The power is off and the house is completely empty. They also found 2 sets of footprints in the bushes. It appears they ordered from both places and waited for whoever got there first to rob. I was first, but because I didn't get out of the car, they had to wait on Pizza Hut to show up. If only I got out of the car the first time, that would have been me laying on the ground dead. For some reason, a gut feeling perhaps, I did not do what I normally did. I never knocked on another door without the front porch light on, unless I knew the customer really well. I remember telling one person this story, and they told me, "Don't repeat that, don't mess with whatever that was." So I didn't. I guess listen to at your own risk. When I was 10, I went with my parents to this campground so they could visit their friends. They had a son who I got along with, same age. Sometimes, however, if there was other kids around, the son would try and pick on me to impress them. Me and the son went fishing, and right as we were about to leave, another kid comes and joins us, and the son immediately starts picking on me. Not wanting to be stuck on a boat and teased, I decided to leave and walk back to the campground by myself. I didn't want to go straight back to my parents because they'd ask why I wasn't with the sun, and I didn't want to get into it. So I just walked on this U-shaped road. In the center of the U are campers, and on the other side is woods with a lake around it. At the very center of the U is a park. Perfect. I think I'll just sit on the swings until I think enough time has passed to go back. As I'm on the swings, I notice a path directly across from me. I get up and start walking along this dirt path. There are reeds on either side of me, and I have my hands stretched out as I walk dead center of this path. My hands can just barely touch these reeds until I move closer to one side. I walk for about 10 minutes maybe, and I get to this pond. Crystal clear water, and I have this urge to drink it. It looks so refreshing. I kneel down, and suddenly the hairs on my back of my neck go straight up. It was like I snapped back into myself. What am I doing? Why am I about to drink this pond water? Why did I walk down this path? I start feeling really uneasy, so I turn around and start walking the same way I came. Let me clarify. There's only one path. Straight. I made no turns. I didn't walk around this pond. I simply walked to the end of the path, got freaked out about something, and turned around. Suddenly, all types of bugs were around. I kept walking, and I noticed the dirt path is getting more and more narrow. The reeds and tall grass are now at my arms, and there's a constant buzzing feeling in my ears from these bugs. The path gets so narrow that I have to walk sideways to avoid the reed. I yell out help, and I hear a voice ask if I'm okay. I reply I'm lost, and a woman says, "Just walk straight, honey, I see you." I see nothing, it's just tall grass and reeds. I walk a few feet and see the road. I'm scratched from head to toe, and there's a woman by the playground asking what happened. She takes a Kleenex out from her pocketbook and starts wiping some of the scratches, and I tell her what happened. I look behind me and see no path. I'm at the same part. I'm in front of the swing I was just on, and the woman looks at me and tells me that I shouldn't even think about it and to just forget it happened because I'm fine now. But she really emphasized not to talk about it. I've always been on the fence about it. I'm sure there was one path in or one path out. The bugs could have steered me off course. Maybe I'm being paranoid or something more sinister that nearly trapped me for good.
Definitely elevating for the 966. The ill suicidal liable to take titles and make vital signs, but not like no cancer. Answer, there's no chance to advance to ya. Kuya got blazed through ya. The great super science, applying pressure. I desecrate with double O's and bubble foes while I cut you, bro. I juggle flows that goes ballistic, reminiscent of exquisite cannibalistics and a sadistic doctor. My sick shit, notcha, improper. Got clockers like bad.